Aang and company try to help two warring tribes cross a canyon in one of the most infamous and criticized episodes of the show. This is Avatar Explained for episode 111, The Great Divide. Part 1, Synopsis. So Aang and crew come to the entrance of a canyon, and they're met there by two tribes. One of them is very posh and pretentious and condescending. The other is very crude and vulgar and rough and tumble. These two tribes hate each other because of something that happened a long time ago. Not something that actually affects them today, but something that happened before the births of anyone who's alive today in these tribes. And they don't want to cross the canyon together. They jockey to get the support of the canyon guide, but eventually the canyon guide hurts his leg, and Aang, Katara, and Sokka have to lead these tribes across. The tribes eventually have to split apart because they refuse to travel with each other. Katara goes with one tribe, Sokka goes with the other, and Aang stays in the middle. He's lonely and miserable, but he pledges to get through this. During the night, Katara and Sokka each get told a story about the conflict between the tribes. The difference being that Sokka hears one side, Katara hears the other, and so they form these very negative opinions of the other tribe. When they converge at the ending of the canyon, Katara and Sokka start shouting at each other, but they get over it in the end. Aang yells at both the tribes for bringing food, even though they weren't supposed to, and their bringing food draws in the canyon crawlers, these atrocious grisly beasts who try to stop them from getting over the canyon. But in the end, Aang comes up with a plan to use the canyon crawlers to get up the wall of the canyon. So they do that, everyone gets to the other side, but they still hate each other. But then Aang solves the conflict by talking about how both sides have it wrong, that the conflict has been completely blown out of proportion. He says that he was there when the conflict the tribes are arguing about happened, and that it wasn't nearly as big of a deal as they said it was, that they were just two kids competing for a ball. However, at the very end of the episode, Aang admits that he made the entire story up just to solve the conflict. And everyone laughs and giggles. Katara's like, oh, that is so bad, but neither she nor Sokka seriously criticize him for lying like that. Part 2. Analysis. Is it really that bad? According to a lot of Avatar fans, this is by far the worst episode of the show. According to them, this is a complete departure from the entire rest of the show. According to them, it's not just the worst episode, it's the worst episode by far. It's the worst episode by several degrees. It's so bad that it does not deserve to be compared with the other episodes. And to be honest, I don't really agree with that. Now, I want to make clear, I am not defending The Great Divide. It is not a good episode, and it is indeed one of the worst episodes of the show. I've read many criticisms of this episode, and one of the most prominently voiced is that what Aang does is completely out of character for him. But I don't know if I see that. It's wrong, but Aang's a kid, he's playful, he's juvenile. I don't think it's too hard to believe that he would do something like that. What's wrong is how the show frames this. It frames it as it being okay, it frames it as there not being a problem, but it is a problem. You can't just solve prejudice by lying. I shouldn't need to say this, but apparently I do. Also, there are a lot of other problems with this episode. Some people pretend that it's all great, or at least okay, until that final moment. I don't think that at all. Yes, Aang revealing that he made the whole story up is the worst part of the episode, but the entire episode before that is very contrived and very vapid. Everything is just so simplistic and sterile. Great art reveals something honest and true about reality, about our world. This doesn't. This feels completely synthetic and wrong and shallow. This is even down to the tribes themselves. I normally like side characters in Avatar, even ones that aren't my favorite are still pretty good. But these guys aren't. They aren't real people. They don't feel real. They feel like constructs created for the purposes of this very shallow, very misguided episode of television. And the problems go deeper than that. Probably my most fundamental problem with this episode is its very simplistic view on conflict and prejudice. Avatar is normally much better about this. Avatar normally demonstrates a deep and nuanced and layered understanding of why people don't like each other, of how conflicts develop, of how even good intentions can have bad results. But this is a complete misfire. I'm not going to mince words about that. It doesn't understand conflict. Not at all. It's not even that it's mediocre or that it could have been better. It's that it's flat out bad. This isn't real. This isn't sensible. They present conflict as being just about one thing that happened a long time ago, which, no, it's not. Real conflict that still brews, even when it is irrational, it's not that simple. It's not just, oh, that thing happened a long time ago and people are still mad about it. No, it's that whatever thing it was, if it is just one thing, continues to have an impact today. It still affects people's lives. That's why people are still talking about it. It's not just one thing that happened so long ago that anyone who's talking about it is just silly. No, that's disrespectful. It's dishonest. Avatar should be better. It usually is better. It usually understands why people do the things they do and why people want the things they want. This just feels like pure cynicism. It's detached, adolescent misunderstanding. It's someone who doesn't think that there's any real reason that we have conflict just because, oh, everyone's so stupid, man. Everyone's so random. Can't we just all get along? No, the show should be better. But I don't just want to rant for the whole course of this. Trust me, if you just want to listen to someone rant about the problems with the Great Divide, there are a lot of good channels for that. I do want to give the episode some credit, because it's not completely terrible. There are things here that either do work or could work if they were in the context of a better episode. The whole thing with Sokka and Katara fighting at the start of the episode, then getting these very different versions of these stories, then ultimately burying the hatchet at the end, that's not a bad outline, that's not a bad template, and even the execution isn't egregious. It's just okay, it's standard. There's nothing wrong with it, there's nothing to get upset about. And I like the different styles of animation when they're showing the different sides of the incident that is the reason they're still fighting. The different styles of animation convey the personality differences between the tribes, but they're also just charming in of themselves. It's nice to see the show shift animation styles. That's something you can do when you have an animated show that you can't really do with a live-action show. It's all drawings, it's all models, so you can shift that if you want. It's not easy, and it's costly, and you shouldn't do it for extended periods of time, but it's not that hard to shift from one style of animation to a radically different style of animation and make it not feel jarring. Whereas if you shifted from, say, live-action to an extended animated sequence, it would feel a little awkward and a little jarring and a little bizarre. So points to the episode for that. And again, one last point of praise. It does not feel as out of character as some people say it does. There is an episode that feels far more out of character, and we'll be getting to that later. That is a terrible episode of Avatar. This one is merely meh. It's okay. It's bad by Avatar standards, but it's not a disgustingly disingenuous and shallow episode of television. It's not as bad as its detractors make it out to be, but if you come to this episode thinking it's going to be some secret, underappreciated masterpiece, well, that's not right either. Part 3. Context. There are 2 steps to this. You have to look at the context within the show, and then the context outside the show. First, let's look at outside the show. This episode is much more maligned than it should be. It's become a symbol in the fandom for everything wrong with the show, everything that's not as good as it could have been, everything that ought to have been better. And that's a lot of weight to put on this episode. The internet loves Avatar: The Last Airbender, and rightfully so. It is one of the best shows ever made, animated or otherwise. At the same time, it's not perfect. Its flaws need a scapegoat. When someone says, oh, Avatar isn't perfect, they need something to point to, and they almost always point to the Great Divide. It's had a lot of vitriol piled onto it over the years, and though I don't want to defend this episode, I do find that vitriol kind of inappropriate. Now let's look at the context inside the show, which, funnily enough, is not that different. The tribes were originally going to appear again, but after the immense fan backlash against this episode, the showrunners decided to not have that happen. Moreover, they made a joke about this episode in episode 317, The Ember Island Players, which is where Aang and the group go to see a play about themselves. During the play, Team Avatar in the show goes to the Great Divide, and they're like, oh, the Great Divide, the largest canyon in the Earth Kingdom. Let's keep flying. Which is a funny joke, I will admit that, and I do like how the show is willing to laugh at itself, but I'm not really sure how I feel about the show changing its course even slightly to compensate for fan demand and fan backlash. I'm sure that seemed a lot more innocent back in the mid-2000s, when social media wasn't as large as it is, but in these days, when creators get such a huge flood of hate for controversial decisions, good or otherwise, the idea that the creators change their plans based on fan backlash is a little disconcerting. It shows fans that the creators will listen to them if they keep pushing, so they do push, some in ways that aren't harmful and some in ways that are. Fan culture is a lot more angry and I don't want to say disturbed, but it's a little less balanced than it was back even 10-15 years ago. I don't want to say it was perfect then, but it's definitely gotten worse since. But again, I'm not going to be the person who's like, oh, it's so terrible that they changed this. No, The Great Divide was a bad episode, at least by the standards of this show. And I'm certainly not upset inherently that the tribes do not appear. I didn't want to see them again. All I'm saying is that fan entitlement culture is a problem. Fans have come to expect that the showrunners will listen to them and do what they want, and that can be a little dangerous at times. Also, on a lighter note, think about how this would not have had to be an episode if they had Toph in the group. She would just earthbend everyone. There would be no conflict, problem solved, that's it. So if you don't like this episode, think about how if Toph was in the group, it would not have existed. The problem could have been solved very easily. Just something to keep in mind. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. And above all, keep watching Avatar. It's a great show. Don't forget to tune in for the next Avatar Explained. Adios, comrades.